The commemoration of the MLK Day of Service is a call to act on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy of social justice and equity. This day marks our opportunity to recommit as citizens by volunteering in service to others. Through those efforts, we can strengthen ties to our communities and one another while we address critical issues that divide us. When Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke at the March on Washington, he described a fierce urgency of now. More than 50 years later, his words have renewed meaning. They remind us that we are stronger when we march forward together. The global pandemic and events of 2020 and 2021 have opened our eyes wider to the inequity in our world. The time is now to act with swift urgency to deliver on the promise of Dr. King's example and mission. While much work remains to fulfill Dr. King's dream of a beloved community, AmeriCorps remains committed to showing that service can help unify Americans of different backgrounds and experiences. Through service, we can build more equitable and just communities to underpin racial equity, expand civic opportunities, and foster respect for individual differences. In 2021, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, ServeWyoming's Casper MLK Planning Committee needed to take our Day of Service and celebration virtual. To achieve this, we started a project entitled the Casper Freedom Trail. We are exploring various populations, cultures, events, and historic aspects of our community, with a focus on Black history through the role of churches, businesses, and people in the civil rights movement. Following this presentation, you are invited to explore the Casper Freedom Trail driving route.
I really didn't know a lot about it. Again, I've only been here for 15 years. And I realized that not a lot, it's not out there. It's not spoken about a lot, you know? And so I was pleasantly surprised to read some of the stuff. It's not common knowledge, you know, which, to be honest with you, as an African-American man, it saddens me, you know? It's almost like, for some people, it's out of sight, out of mind, you know? We all know about George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and, you know, whoever else, you know, that's common knowledge because it's taught in our school systems. But what about the great, the rich history here in Casper when it comes to African-American people? Unfortunately, that's not common knowledge. And it saddens me because it's good history. It's great history, you know? And I just wish that it would be spoken about even more.
I served 16 and a half years with the NAACP as a branch president, and I served as what they call the first vice president of the Colorado, Montana, Wyoming State Conference. So that was my territory as a first vice, 3 states, plus I served as the chairman here in the Casper, Wyoming branch, which it's not limited to Casper, Wyoming. They assign cases to people who are closest to the problem. One of the biggest problems that we had in Wyoming one time was people who were interracially married were being attacked in Gillette. And I had 5 cases up there, and which I had to, after my 5th case, I said, I've got to do something here. After they were attacked, Klan information would go out in those neighborhoods. It was scaring the hell out of those people up there. Most people in the state of Wyoming are not familiar with what the Klan will do. So that's where the scary part come in. You have these people are like self-appointed community activists, community protection. Those are dangerous people. I said enough is enough, so I sit down and drafted a letter to to a Klansman that I knew. And I got his information off the internet, and I drafted a letter and wrote to him to come to Casper. Let's sit down and talk about these incidents that's happening up there in Campbell County. My board thought that I had lost my mind to ask a Klansman to come out in the open. He wrote me back, and he said, I don't want to come back to Wyoming to be attacked by anti-racists. So we had to guarantee him protection. And I mean, not just hoodlums off the street. I had first-class, government-trained Navy SEALs here and come to Wyoming to protect myself, my staff, and him. He had to get permission from the Grand Dragon and the Imperial Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan to come to Wyoming again and to sit down and meet with us. They thought he was going to be assassinated. So the Imperial Wizard said no, voted no, and he was overrun. He was overruled by the Grand Dragon. And I mean, that's how it went down. I mean, it took me 2 months to get everything set up because our people had to be go through a self-marshaling training. And you had to be certified in self-marshaling training. We had to pick out the best place, the safest place to have this guy lodged at the Parkway Plaza. I had a bomb expert come in here, and then he shows up, bang. And we all thought he was coming with his cone hat and his regalia on. He walked in there with an attaché case, 3-piece suit, dressed really nice. And he comes in, we shake hands and sit down and got down to business. I asked him to join the NAACP, and he did. He joined and made a donation. And that made world news. It straightened the problem out. We didn't hear any more about interracial couples being beat up in Campbell County. Once you get involved in doing this civil rights work, it's dangerous work because it's in your face. I got to get in your face to get this done. What I found in Wyoming, authorities like to be given a chance to sit down and talk face to face. That is the best way. That method is what made Casper branch of the NAACP the smallest but the most effective branch in the state conference. And when I got that word, we were the smallest and the most effective, well, you can stick your chest out on that, and nobody got hurt, nobody got beat up, and we got something resolved. I resigned from the NAACP after being chairman here for 16 and a half years, and was almost immediately picked up by another civil rights organization, Pikes Peak Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was started by Martin Luther King Jr., and have been given the task to help start new offices from Wyoming all the way to California to try to bring our Native American brothers in on the civil rights movement. I've seen Wyoming come a long way in 50 years. I've been told by the Justice Department that during my tenure at the NAACP, we almost single-handedly changed the course of Wyoming in the area of civil rights. That is a great accomplishment for the state of Wyoming.
The only thing I can say about the Southern Mansion is that it was a dance hall and a rooming house, and dance halls were very, very popular because that was the main entertainment dance halls were also ways of people earning money. And so you bought the tickets, and then you would go and select a partner, typically a female partner. And if, as they collected their tickets, they were reimbursed for how many dances they had participated in. So if you got a bunch of tickets, you went home with a bunch of money. It was also known for bootlegging. And so there were a lot of bootleggers operating in the sandbar, but this was a very prominent one. And of course, there were things that happened, police taking money under the table, or a connection being made with a high-ranking police officer so that raids, you knew when the raids were going to take place. Very lively, very, very lively, and a lot of fun. The one thing about that sandbar district is that first thing that it was demolished during the urban renewal era. And in the Black community, in the African American community, we refer to this as urban removal because of the number of Black homes and businesses that were torn down during that era. The funny thing about my great-grandmother's club is her club was not in the Sandbar district, nor was her rooming house in the Sandbar district, but they were both removed. And the funny thing about her rooming house is there's a big hole between Pavelka's grocers and the Carpenters Union. And that big hole was where my great-grandmother's rooming house had been. But for some reason, they decided to designate her businesses as being subject to removal through the urban renewal process. And the other thing fascinating about the Sandbar district is many prominent artists came to Casper and performed in that part of the city because of the segregation, of course, that was rampant. But many of those clubs, like the Matt Family Hotel and Restaurant or the Jazzland Theater, would have seen people of the likes of Count Basie and Duke Ellington. Those artists performed in that part of the city. And that's where the African American community went to celebrate those artists. And it was called the Chitlin Circuit because this was the food that you would find in many of the restaurants. The whole idea of having a section of the city that was very much alive and vibrant, like the Day and Night Cafe. That was my great-grandmother's friend's business, Fanny Bell. And Fanny Bell, of course, is noted prominently in the Sandbar book. That was where they did the Southern Fried Chicken and the steaks and chops. That was the business that moved from my great-grandmother's location on Yellowstone and located in the 200 block of West A Street. It was the red light district for Casper. My mother used to tell me stories about on Sunday afternoons after church, my grandfather would take them riding through the Sandbar and especially through the red light district where the prostitutes were hanging out and inviting their customers to come in. And my mother always thought that their clothes were so exquisite. She always talked about how well dressed they were. And I think that's why she took an eye to fashion, was being able to see the beautiful clothing of the prostitutes down there. We also took them down to the train station right down here at the depot. And their excitement was seeing the people who got off the train from the different places. One of the things that people don't quite understand is Creole and what that means. The Creole concept actually comes out of Louisiana. Things like jambalaya, red beans and rice, shrimp étouffée. Those are the Creole dishes that would have been served at Shirley's Cafe, bringing that taste of New Orleans. And people should not think that all Creole dishes are super spicy, because Creole food runs the gamut of taste. There are spicy dishes, there are mild dishes, but also remember there's that good bread pudding that you would find in a Creole cafe. Bread pudding, the best bread pudding, let me pronounce it right, is done with day-old, sometimes more old bread. And then you use your milk concoctions, and it would bake up just perfectly light. And rice pudding would also be one of those desserts. Just mouth-watering types of things.
I named my oil field company Cyclone Oil Service, Ltd. Limited. And we did remedial work in the Salt Creek oil field, about 40 miles, 45 miles north of Casper. And we set some records out there. I think they probably still hold true today. I won over 15 performance awards. I pulled 365 wells in 1 year, working 5 days a week with 2 rigs. That was a record. I went on and took that little company uphill. Within 5 or 6 months, I had 5 trucks. And on the Cyclone Well Service side, I got a government contract, and I went up to 4 rigs on that. And so we were running 26 employees, 33 part-time and full-time employees here in the county. As the oil field started to go downhill, all of my companies were tied to the oil field. So they all started going downhill as well. It saddened me to watch my credit deteriorate. I had a good credit rating with Dun & Bradstreet, and I worked up to the point where I could get things without putting down payments on them and stuff like that. I had that kind of credit, and it just crashed my spirit to see that it went the other way in a hurry. It was just like you turn the light switch off. It was sad to see everybody scrambling and nowhere to go. There was a lot of resentment in me being there and being on the level that I was on. Even though they know you have advantages and they have to hire minorities on government property and stuff like that, it's a lot of resentment comes with that. The resentment was so thick, you cut it with a knife. But I had a family to support like everybody else. You almost have to be better than everybody else. And my crews showed that. We did that through just outperforming everybody. One of my ex-competitors told me that when they came into the field, wanted a chance, one of the guy who ran the field told him, said, "Oh, Jimmy is out there and you better hit the ground running." I said, "He didn't tell you that." He said, "Yes, he did." It was almost like being baptized in fire.
In remembrance of Reverend Reeb and in honor of all of the marchers for civil rights, the Casper Mural Project created the James Reeb Civil Rights Mural in 2019, which is located on the back wall of 225 South David Street, visible from Center Street. The people featured on the mural from left to right are Reverend James Reeb, Reverend Orloff Miller, Reverend Clark Olson, Annie Lee Cooper, Jimmy Lee Jackson, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. After Bloody Sunday, Martin Luther King Jr. put out the call to ministers and people of faith to come to Selma, Alabama for Voters' Rights March to Montgomery. Reverend Reeb, a Unitarian minister based in Boston, answered the call. The night before the march, Reverend Reeb and 2 other white ministers were attacked by 4 white segregationists, and he died 2 days later. In addition to memorial services in Selma, Boston, and Washington, D.C., a service was held at Casper's First Presbyterian Church.
Most people have no idea that there was ever an era of brotherhood and camaraderie, given the long history of segregation in this nation. But my grandfather was a member of the Odd Fellows. And I went into that building about a year, maybe 2 years ago. And the odd thing was this feeling of deja vu, that I had been in there before, because of the way that the Oddfellow Auditorium is set up. There is a balcony area, and then there's the main floor area. And I believe that my grandfather took me in there for a meeting of one type or another. I think he was down on the main floor and he sat me up in that balcony, because it was a strange feeling, almost like you're going back in time to realize a sensation. And especially when I sat on those seats, they felt so familiar in terms of the leather that was on those seats. It was cracked, of course, by then. You can go and experience and see the symbols that go along with having been an Oddfellow. I also remember seeing things around the house that have to do with being Oddfellows and Masons, because my family is fraternally connected. And seeing those kinds of things and not knowing then what those symbols stood for or how to read those books, I have since learned how to through my own affiliations. And so that is the information as far as the fraternal organizations, because the Masons still at that time were segregated and only recently began to be a desegregated organization.
I met Floyd Crisp out on Interstate 25 back during the CB radio craze. You remember that? And we had handles, what they call them, CB handles. And so I noticed this guy was talking, and I cut in because he had a southern drawl, and I cut in on that. We got to talking to him, and he says, "Hey, when do we meet up?" I said, "Well, what's your handle?" He said, "The White Hawk." The White Hawk. Okay, so I hadn't met him, so I'm saying he's a white man that talks like a black man. Okay, that's the way I was thinking. So all of a sudden, this big white Cadillac shows up, and this guy who really, really dark, had gold teeth in his mouth. And I said, "The White Hawk?" And so that's how I met Floyd Crisp, and he told me where his shop was. He had a detail shop down on Beach Street where they detailed cars for the dealerships around town. He'd shampoo your car, he'd shampoo your engine, shampoo your frame, he'd wax your car, and they have certain type of detail like blue coral wax back then. It takes a lot of time to wax that car with blue coral and clean it up real nice. They did a really good job of detailing cars around town. It was a pretty good business for him. That's all he did. The building is vacant now. I don't think anybody's been in there since he left. He quit because the fine lint that comes off of that buffing machine, and you have those wool pads, that lint, he didn't inhale a bunch of that, and he got sick, and he had to quit.
Before there was a Martin Luther King, there was a Grace AME church. And in that church was preached the idea of equality. And this was much, much earlier than Martin Luther King. Grace AME Chapel had as its pastor James O. Minor, who came to that church around 1926. And he was speaking about fighting for your rights, demonstrating for your rights, or even just claiming your rights. And so that message was being preached from the pulpit. And there were many people who heard that and followed that advice. When I talked with my Aunt Marie, who was the daughter of James O. Minor, she said that his greatest concern was that people would not be arrested. Now, this was well before the Martin Luther King era, but he was concerned that they would do things to be arrested. And so he was always saying, whatever you do or however we do it, we must work out that plan. In terms of the other ministers of the church, the most recent being Benjamin Watson, who is also a relative. Benjamin Watson has long been an advocate for equality, for working for one's rights and asserting one's claim to those rights. This would be true, I know, of Grace AME.
Grace AME has been shut down for quite a few years in itself, and prior to that, their closing down, they did not have much to do with the movement. It was still back in the times where churches, the white churches, white folk went there, black churches, black folk went there. So I would consider it one of the most racist hours of the year was at 11 o'clock on Sundays. And we had to tear that down. Of course, Grace AME was one of the elder churches that was here, and that none of that was going on then.
Nellie Lockhart was my great-grandmother, and she actually migrated to Casper, coming out of Mississippi, going into a place called Boley. And in Boley, she encountered the very, very progressive, predominantly Black town. And so she brought those concepts into Casper when she read there was a need for a rooming house for, at that time, called colored men working on the railroad. And so one of those colored men was my grandfather. And he stayed in that rooming house and met my grandmother. My great-grandmother rooming house served as that meeting point for our family to get its start. She had actually come out of Mississippi because of the changes that were taking place post-Civil War. And it was always fascinating to me that she was always looking to exercise her civil rights. The Black codes in Mississippi did allow her to marry my great-grandfather because she was Native American and he was African. So there was this problem with their getting married until the Black codes did come in, and that benefited her and him. So then she went from there to Boley, and in Boley, everything was working just fine until Oklahoma got its statehood. And at that point, she was going to be disenfranchised from being able to exercise her civil rights of voting. Therefore, she came to Casper. And that's how all of that got started in Casper when she had the rooming house.
Mike was born in 1963 to Fred and Mary Devereaux. Mike's mother, Mary, was an active member and leader of the Golden Orchids Extension Club of the Wyoming Federation of Colored Women's Clubs. Fred held a degree in finance and was a highly respected, successful businessman in Casper as owner and operator of self-service laundry at 1015 East C Street. This success afforded him the time to share his passion for baseball with his sons. Fred coached Mike's Little League teams, and with the Casper Oilers American Legion, was excited to have Mike join the team every summer when he started at Kelly Walsh High School, which did not have a baseball team. Mike helped the Oilers claim 3 state Legion titles. In 1981, his senior year, Mike was awarded the Male Student Athlete of the Year by the Chamber of Commerce. He also earned All-State honors in 3 sports that year, including basketball, football, and track. After high school, Mike followed his father's love of baseball and also pursued a finance degree like his father, hoping to be successful in both. Devereaux left college in 1985 to sign with the Los Angeles Dodgers organization, beginning his professional baseball career in Great Falls, Montana in the Pioneer League, where he was named Pioneer League Player of the Year. In 1989, Mike joined the Baltimore Orioles. The previous year, the Orioles were at the bottom in the league. Adding Devereaux, they climbed on top of the American League's Eastern Division. Mike continued to do well with the Orioles, and during his stellar 1992 season, when he was named Most Valuable Oriole, signed a 1-year contract for over $3 million and placed 7th in the American League MVP voting. In the summer of 1995, Mike signed with the Chicago Red Sox, and in late August was traded to the Atlanta Braves, finally achieving a lifelong goal of playing in the postseason playoffs, and honored as the most valuable player for the Atlanta Braves in the National League Championship Series and helping them win the World Series. In 1996, Devereaux returned to play a full season with the Baltimore Orioles and was named an All-Star center fielder. Mike retired from the majors in 1998. Mike traveled back to Casper in June of 2008 for the first Mike Devereaux baseball tournament. Devereaux threw out the ceremonial first pitch before the Casper Hurricanes hosted that game that night. Mike Devereaux was inducted into the Baltimore Orioles Baseball Team Hall of Fame in August of 2021. He is currently a revolving baseball coach for the IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida, sharing his love of the game with the next generation.
They needed a location for the women's auxiliary. And so that building's at 1135 Burlington Avenue was where the women's organization met. And my grandmother, as club secretary, met in that location. And they met on that 2nd and 4th Tuesday of the month at 8 p.m. promptly. The children here in Casper carried on the kind of struggles that happened in Casper. Casper was one of those cities or towns where there was no separate schools. There were no segregated schools per se for economic reasons. That's why all of my aunts and uncles attended school in Casper. They were integrated schools, but the problem was the impact of what would happen when they were in school. For instance, when they graduated high school at Natrona County High School, there would never be a partner for any of my aunts and uncles. Each one had to walk the graduation line, and they would always put them at the very end of the procession. How difficult it must have been for them to endure the kinds of things that happened in school. The N-word, of course, was always being used against them. My mother had a situation where they were talking about the continent of Africa. The lesson was about the African people, and they described them as having big noses and big lips. And as soon as they did that, all of the children turned and looked at my mother and to see how she demonstrated those particular types of physical characteristics. So there was always a sense of other, but not included and not celebrated. My Aunt Nellie always thought that she was not very bright, but she was quite bright. I get concerned about what kind of treatment they received in the schools because of their being of African ancestry and the way that teachers imposing a sense of degrading oneself or feeling degraded because of your color. And going back again to what Martin Luther King was about, not because of the color of your skin, but the content of your character. The interesting thing about Casper and the message of exercising one's rights is that Casper did have its own version of sit-ins and demonstrations before Dr. Martin Luther King elevated those civil rights activities. My mother, in fact, when she found out that Walgreens drugstore was going to be opened, it was my mother and her friends and siblings who went down to that brand new Walgreens to order their sodas. And they saved up their own money. She must have been about 15 years old when she did this. It was again in the 30s, exercising those rights that had been preached about from the pulpit with Grace AME. She took it to heart and went down, and she had a lot of heart. My mother was very courageous. And they made their order, and when they were told they couldn't drink their sodas there, then they decided to leave. And my mother felt that she had gained something because she made them put those sodas together, and what they were going to do with those sodas was going to be up to them, but they had to throw away product. And understanding the economics of civil rights was something that she was well aware of. Marie, when she was Marie Minor, went to the American Theater as a kind of a sit-in act because they only had designated areas for what they called Negroes, where they were allowed to sit in the theater. Well, she and her friends decided to sit in the white-only area, and of course, they were asked to leave. But it was the idea that they were not going to be told or prevented from exercising their right to sit and be free people. There are also aspects of the children's lives. Later on, when my mother became an adult, she became a member of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. Many people don't realize that those women's clubs were actually set up to challenge the idea that women should be suppressed. And so women came together in those clubs to be public in their actions. They did a lot of civil actions, encouraging people to vote, looking out for the elderly as well, because many times the elderly women especially, suffered a great deal. And then there was a carrying over of that entire idea that women were not to be suppressed, that women were more free and should be free. And so you had this women's club movement taking place all over the country. When you get down to, again, the children and their civil rights activities, there was kind of like a de facto walking with classmates by the time my Uncle Ernie and my Uncle Robert graduated high school, because by then there were other African American classmates, and so they were able to march with someone when they graduated. So there are all kinds of things that happened. There was an evolution of things. There was the addition of persons to our community, many of them brought in by my great-grandmother, who encouraged people to migrate here. And so the idea of the family being recorded and Black people being recorded, that we were a historic entity here in Casper, caused my Uncle Melvin to develop the directory that he did of people who were living in Casper. And so that's how that document got put together. Aunt Effie was an interesting person because when she was in high school, she was pushed down the stairs. The mean-spiritedness was just always there. And she was always challenging it. So when she put my Uncle Ronnie into the baby contest at the Elks Club, she was asked to take him out, claiming that they had a rule, but they couldn't find the rule in writing, of course. And so she resisted taking him out. And that's when she contacted the NAACP. And Roy Wilkins came to Casper to support her cause. It seems really silly thinking about the president of the NAACP coming to Casper because of a baby contest and my aunt being asked to take him out. That was also the beginning of the NAACP because it brought that particular organization into our community. And my Uncle Ernie continued to work through the NAACP, at one time being a president and then a secretary. There was also the ongoing effort of Robert and Ernie because they went into the post office, and my Uncle Ernie continued to evolve through the civil service system. My Uncle Robert recognized the disparity in his insurance costs that he was paying, and he challenged that so that the insurance costs were evened out for African Americans and whites. Both my Uncle Ernie and Uncle Robert crossed the red line. Ernie and his wife Marie crossed that red line on the west side of Casper, and Robert and his wife crossed the red line on the east side of Casper. And my Aunt Nellie Ann, who had moved to New Jersey, challenged the Jim Crow housing in Camden, New Jersey. And she was able to purchase a house that she decided to live in. It had been a white-only neighborhood, and she successfully purchased her house there. Now, the rooming house wasn't her only business. She had the Casper Colored Community Clubhouse that was then called the Paradise Club. The Boli activism, my great-grandmother brought along with her, and that was why that clubhouse, when it opened in the early 1930s, was used for election dinners because she was encouraging voting. And it was the original home of the Chicken Shack as a business that would be featured in the Sandbar book, because that was the original home of that was the 1717 East Yellowstone location. And then it moved from that location into the Sandbar area. It was also the home of the Yellowstone Lodge Elks. Those were the Black Elks. And it was a meeting space for all kinds of events taking place. It was a serviceman's club because in World War II, Blacks and whites did not have the same facilities for socialization. And it was a meeting place for the Francis Townsend proposed old age revolving pension plan. And this was the foundational plan for Social Security. And so when they met at the Townsend Club at that location, that's when that continuing effort to have a civil rights and operate with civil rights demonstrated at that club. And our family was again involved in a foundational place for this nation. Francis Townsend was among those people who had gotten the ear of Franklin Roosevelt and talked about the clubs that they had all across the nation. And the Townsend Club 6 happened to be in Casper. So it was demonstrated and explained that individuals donated money into a fund to assist old age persons. So there was a pension plan because those plans had not existed prior to that. And so they donated money each month to assist those who needed help. And that's actually the same foundation of Social Security. It operates on the same principle that you donate into a fund, and those who need funds then receive payments in terms of their Social Security benefits. There was a petition that was signed by over 20 million people to get this pension plan into operation. And I just happened to have the copy or the original that my great-grandmother circulated here in Casper. There were all kinds of business dealings and petitions. People signed in pencil in those days because there was great trust that nothing was going to be done, erased, or in any way changed from what their original purpose was or intention was. And I just found it interesting that people were so trusting. It was a different era, a totally different time.
Mel Hamilton was born on February 14, 1947. Mel was born in Charleston, South Carolina. When he was 3, his family moved to Wilmington, North Carolina. At that time, his father was away for work in Michigan, and his mother was caring for 7 children by herself. Mel admits during this time he started to get into mischief with his buddies and would sneak out his window at night to meet his crew on the street corner. His mother found him a placement at Boys Town in Nebraska outside of Omaha. He eventually found his place and friends and ended up staying there for 4 years. Mel's Boys Town friend, Kenneth Gilchrist, received a football scholarship to the University of Wyoming and invited Mel to join him. Mel accepted a scholarship to the university and moved to Wyoming in 1965. While at the university in Laramie, Mel experienced housing discrimination, and one of his coaches confronted him for dating white women, telling him people would not let that happen. Following this experience, Mel left the university after 2 years. Mel then joined the Army for 18 months. He returned to Wyoming, and the same coach confessed he was mistaken and wanted Mel to finish his education. Mel returned to school in 1969. That year, the Black Students Alliance organized a protest of the LDS Church and their rule barring Black men from joining the priesthood. They organized a symbolic protest for the following week during a game with BYU, with players wearing black armbands in protest. The day before the game, the coaches called the protesting players to the gym and kicked all 14 off the team, thus the name, the Black 14. This became a powerful case for the First Amendment. The case was taken to the court in Cheyenne, Wyoming, then the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals in Denver, Colorado. At this point, Mel had been running the case himself and run out of funds. Following the Denver ruling, the case was dropped. Later in life, Mel's son, Malik, met his wife, Melissa, of nearly 23 years now, while attending Utah State University in the 1990s. Melissa was Mormon, and Malik began to explore the faith while they were dating. When Malik told his father of his conversion and intention to marry Melissa, Mel's only response was, "What do you think I was fighting for?" Malik now holds the position in the church that his dad fought for with the Black 14. While Mel was not able to take the Black 14 case to the Supreme Court, he had won a much more personal victory for his son. Mel moved to Casper in 1974 to start his education career at Kelly Walsh as a coach. He then became a PE teacher at a local elementary school while he continued to coach football, wrestling, and track at Kelly Walsh. He was later a full-time PE teacher and coach at Kelly Walsh. Mel received his master's degree in counseling and served at Roosevelt High School as a counselor and assistant principal for 4 years before becoming the first Black principal in the state at East Junior High. During his first year as principal at East Junior High in 1997, Mel noticed some teachers having an especially difficult time with his leadership role at the school. People wanted to test his authority and would sometimes make hurtful racial remarks. In 1998, Mel was an honored speaker at the Martin Luther King celebration. Students of the East Junior High REACT group presented their ongoing oral history project recording Black history in Casper. Mel spoke following a showing of the Black 14 video at Casper College. Mr. Hamilton was honored that same year during Black History Month. The local chapter of the NAACP awarded him the I Am First award. In 1999, Mr. Hamilton was removed as principal and placed on administrative leave by the school district. He was later appointed as the director of the Alternative Education Program. A 1997 school district investigative report confirmed the harassment and discrimination suffered by Mr. Hamilton during his time at East Junior High. In May 2000, disciplinary action was recommended against 7 East Junior High faculty members and staff members in relation to this harassment and discrimination. Disciplinary action was eventually brought against 6 of the 7 members in the investigation. In 2005, Mel became the first Black man appointed to the parole board. Mr. Hamilton used his counseling skills to help inmates working to better themselves. Mel feels that Casper continues to grow as an accepting and safe community. While Casper works to improve, it still has a lot of room to grow and learn. Mel has built his life on a foundation of brotherly love and treating everybody the way he would want to be treated.
I was asked to get involved in civil rights back when I defended Mel Hamilton in a case here in town as a John Q. citizen defending a friend. I listened to a situation where Mel Hamilton was the principal at East Junior High. He was the first principal here. He evaluated one of his teachers. He wasn't doing too good. And it spun out of control once everything was out in the open. They spun it and said that Mel needed a psychiatric evaluation. But we knew the truth about what was going on. He took the punishment that they gave him to the point where his face started to droop. So Mel and I got together and he said, look, let's try to talk once a week, because I was facing the same thing he was facing out in the patch, this resentment. And so this nicety of complexity kept going on and going on, and they wanted to get rid of Mel because he really did expose where the real problem was. They called names. The judge put a gag order on the press, and I wanted to expose these names of these people that were making his life a living hell. I got the names, and I got the reports and stuff like that, and I didn't have confirmation, so I called the press and asked them if they would confirm the names that I had, and they said, look, we're not going to jail for you. We're under a court order not to say anything. So I talked to their attorney and said, look, he told me, he said, look, do you remember the old sandwich board advertisement? He said, if you did something like that and we just come and take a picture, you know, that's legal. That's how we can get around it. So I did that. So I made a poster board with the names on it, but I still wasn't certain that I had the right name. I'm sitting at the house one night, about 11:30 at night, my phone rings, and I answered it, and the guy said, I understand you have the names of the racist that was at East Junior High. He said, call them out. I called out the names, and he prefaced his statement by saying, if one of them is wrong, I'll say something. So I called out all the names, and he said, do you get it? And he hung up the phone. That was it. So based off of that phone call, I put on a 3-piece suit. I bought 2 Confederate flags and put it on a Dracula cape. I used to take my kids out Halloween. And the reason why I did that, I was down in the South. I finished my brother's house. And those Southerners down there brag about that flag. If you want to sell anything, put a Confederate flag with it. You can sell a widget, just put that flag with it. So I took that idea and I bought 2 brand new flags, and I wanted to sell the idea that this is a racist society, and I've got these flags to prove it. So anyway, I went out and stood out in front of East Junior High, did a one-man protest, got my life threatened. I lost my job. I saved males, but I was a drilling superintendent up in Chadderdon County, and I showed up for work one morning, and And the company man had that newspaper, and he was trying to swat me with that newspaper. What do you mean desecrating my flag like that? And I got run off of a job for desecrating the Confederate flag. He was serious. You through drilling that well, you know, you're done. Gus Anderson came to Casper, Wyoming. He claims that he was driving Mamie Eisenhower's old 41 Cadillac, and that's what he lived in. He lived in a 41 Cadillac until he made enough money to buy a house. He tore down an old hotel. I think it's the old Gladstone Hotel, right here on the corner of First and Center. And that's where he made enough money to start like a salvage yard. And his salvage yard was out here off the Bryanstock Trail. It's still out there, but Gus has passed away. But Gus got into landscaping. He landscaped for the state. He was doing landscaping for the state. He sold antique brick and all kinds of items that came out of these buildings that he tore down, sinks, fixtures, light fixtures, and he made a living out of that. He did really, really well. He and his brother were going to bid on the job here in Casper, but they were in Denver at the time. And he told me how they needed to get here and get here fast. So they had enough money. They went to the airport and bought an airplane. And he said the guy gave him a crash course in how to fly this plane. They flew that plane from Denver to Casper and landed out here at the airport. And he and his brother, Gus couldn't read. You know, he couldn't read. He could hardly write his name. And I think his brother was the same way. But there they are up in the air, navigating a plane. And so I was laughing so hard when he told me the story. He said, "I can't believe you did that." He said, yeah, I did it. We did it. He was a nice person to be around, talk to, knew a lot of things. He served his country in the military, and he passed away. When they diagnosed him with cancer, the doctor said, "Have you ever been in the service?" "Yeah." "Have you ever been in Japan?" "Yeah," because the kind of cancer that he had originates in Japan. And so he and his brother both got sick with cancer. He just passed away. So, we were friends for a long time. My wife would call him up. He loved banana bread. She was cooking banana bread. She'd call him up wherever he was. Man. If he was passing through here, he'd stop and get some banana bread. Keep moving. I met Floyd Crisp out on Interstate 25, and then I learned that he had won the Wyoming State Championship in sprint cars. I think it was his first year. I think he was a rookie of the year, and he wins the state championship. And I said, wow. And then I get to think, talking around to other guys, stuff like that. And I said, well, what kind of motor are you running? Well, they said he got this old engine. He bought an old engine. Come to find out, the racer Richard Petty built that old engine, and it was just, they said it was junk. He bought it anyway, and that's what he won the Wyoming Championship with. That was just unbelievable. So it moves on to how he gets the name of the Flying Spade. He wrecked that first car he had, an old Springer, in Rapid City, South Dakota. The car was airborne, and he unbuckled himself and jumped out of that car, beat the car to the ground. And the announcer says, "Who is that man?" And a guy named Bill Liebig, I'll never forget. They call him Wild Bill. He yelled out, "That's the Flying Spade." And if it catches on, I want royalties. Floyd heard that, and he started cavalierly calling himself the Flying Spade. And after he totaled that car out, we bought this car here, brand new. It's a winged outlaw sprinter, Laverne Nance. A company called Davies Development built it for us, and we put that old Petty engine in that car. We took that car from this picture here. It came right off the assembly line, and I took a picture with it. I'm in Rapid City, South Dakota in 1982, and we loaded it up and took it to Black Hill Speedway, and we won that night. Everything clicked. Everything just, it's a beautiful night. About 4,000 people showed up at the race, and he won. We were campaigning this car as far south as Manzanita, Arizona. Far north is Billings, Montana. You know, we show up as, we look good. We had uniforms, shirts, and we looked professional when we got on the track. We knew we meant business when we showed up. And there was a lot of excitement among all of that resentment. Does that make sense? A lot of excitement among all that resentment. So it was fun. It was a lot of fun to campaign that car. I never get away from resentment. And it's like you're always underwater holding your breath. And at some point you got to burst from underneath the water and breathe. So that gave me a chance to breathe. People always wonder, where did old Floyd come from? And I was wondering about that too. You know, you just dropped out of the sky and you're beating everybody. What's going on here? So, but I got to check in on him, and he was born in a little town called McMinnville, Tennessee. McMinnville, Tennessee, where he grew up. And he went to high school there. He graduated from school there. And he left there and came to Wyoming in 1962, working odd jobs around here, and he just stayed. He's still living. He's not racing anymore, but he's driving semi across country. And I asked him to come and be interviewed. He says, well, you know enough about what we did, you can do it. On the track, he was kind of quiet type of guy. That get out there and he'd hold his foot to the floor with that, he'd hold accelerator to the floor, trying to win those races. And he did quite well. You know, we needed more people that would believe in us to sponsor us. But we picked up some sponsors here out of Casper, and that's how we made it as far as we did.
Rock of Ages came about 12 years ago. It was a ground level church, a startup church. And we started with very, very little. A lady gave us a room in her building to start our Sundays. And after that, we found a building. And after that, we found this building. I've been in Casper around 30 years. It wasn't a church that brought me here. I was in Denver and I didn't have a church then. I was just going to church. And then when I got to Casper, God laid on my heart to start a church. We're a religious church, but we do not have an umbrella over us at all. We can worship like we want to worship. Rock of Ages has been around 12 years, and we believe we're going to be around for a long time. So the biggest thing that Rock of Ages do, we can come. We are called basically a healing church. Anyone can come here with any kind of problem, anything, and we will not turn you back. We will not turn you around. We will try to help you or try to get you to help, and that's what we do. Anybody can come. Anybody's welcome. Doesn't matter. So all is welcome, and that's what I got from Mr. King, to love thy neighbor. as you love thyself. I believe we should be more involved than what we are now, even with the march, even with the parades that they have here, or even going out what he stands for, what he stood for, and it was good what he stood for. What really got me that Rock of Ages is a church that has different cultures in it, so we can reach different cultures. We can go out and reach different cultures about what Mr. King talked about him and what he believed and what his principles was. And we like them type of things. And in fact, we even talk about them things in church, and to don't turn nobody around just because they fell into an area that is not good. Always give them hope. And that's one thing he talked about that I did like also. There was always hope at the end of the road. There was always that somebody's always should be around to lift somebody else up when they're going through something, like having a hard time, or even a racial barrier. Let's try to talk it out. Let's work it out. And he got me one other thing when he had liked to talk about things that occurred. He would say, "Let's talk." What I've seen a film on him and video on him, he was always trying to talk it out. Not trying to no violence, no, none of that. Just talk it out, and let's try to reason together to make something work.
Pastor Lewis, when he first came to town, he worked with our church. He attended our church until he got ready to start his own. And then after he started his own, he started building daycares and things and working with kids and things like that. And he's kind of been a little part of everything that we've been doing. So I would give him old slogans and give him kudos for being a part of having a multicultural church and working with all races.
I think, again, it was a matter of trying to find a way to knit Christians together, not just Black Christians, but white and Black Christians together, because as it has been said many times, the 11 o'clock hour on Sunday is the most segregated hour in America. And it has to do with churches being established that cater to actually the culture, because many times the music that you will hear in Black churches is quite different. The civil rights era brought out music that many people outside of the church had not heard. The music was actually tailored to the civil rights movement, so that songs like Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around, and I've been buked and I've been scorned, and We Shall Overcome. All of those have their foundation in Black spirituals and gospels. And so when you think in terms of the civil rights era and the music, you have to turn to the contribution of music that was not only uplifting, but encouraged people and helped them to maintain their steadfastness in a time when people were being so abused. You can look at all of those films about people being hosed and barked at by dogs and attacked by dogs. And the music that came out of the spirituals and gospels is a major part of the civil rights era, and the music that we still sing today. Church brought that out and helped to knit people and bind people together in the effort to realize equality and justice. The main thing that I'm trying to make sure we focus on is understanding the civil rights movement and its spread wherever it happened and when it happened. Most people think about the civil rights movement being associated with Martin Luther King Jr. The thing about that is there were events taking place in Casper earlier than his rise to prominence. The civil rights movement has a lot to do with the Constitution and what our rights are as African Americans.
In August of 1918, members of the Second Baptist Church held a service to honor Casper's Black soldiers who were being sent to the First World War. The Reverend M.A. Elianath gave each of the departing servicemen a flag, cigars, spending money, and a pocket Bible.
It was First Second Baptist Church, and the young people wanted to know why they had to be second in everything. And Reverend Haggerty had a movement to have the name of the church changed from Second Baptist to First Baptist. And that's how First Baptist, Christ First Baptist, came into existence. Matt Campbell and his wife, they called her Aunt Fanny, her name was Fanny Campbell, was the first Black citizens of record here in the city of Casper. And he was a coroner, the first Black coroner here, the only Black coroner that I'm aware of. And the amazing thing about him is he had one foot amputated on one leg and had a leg amputated on the other side, but he took care of all the coroner's work and the taking care of the burying of everyone. And so by him being that, we sought him to get people know that there has been Black Americans that have been a part of Casper's building and things. And so we set a movement that when the city got rid of the land that they were getting rid of between L and M Street in North Casper, to name it after Matthew Campfield.
Matthew Campfield was a former slave who later became a barber in Casper, Wyoming. In the 1870s, Campfield married Fanny Davis. In 1879, the Campfields moved to Wyoming, settling for a time at Fort McKinney, just outside the new town of Buffalo in Johnson County. In 1888, they arrived in Casper. Matthew opened a barbershop on the west side of Center Street between Midwest and 2nd Street, near what is now called the Fox Theater. In the back of his shop, Matthew had a bathtub where a dusty sheep herder or cowboy could take a bath after receiving his haircut at a cost of 50 cents. A cowboy named Mitchell stole the bathtub and took it out to Alcova, 30 miles from town to Sun Ranch, and set it in a hot spring. Instead of going to the police or chasing down the cowboy, Campfield tracked the lost income from the stolen bathtub by putting a mark on the wall anytime a client came in looking for a bath. Mitchell later returned the tub and started a lumber business. At this time, there were 70 marks on the barbershop wall. When Campfield needed lumber for projects on his homestead west of town, he went to Mitchell's lumberyard and got $35 worth of lumber in exchange for the business Mitchell caused him to lose by stealing the tub. Matthew Campfield was highly respected in the community. He was known to have a keen and alert mind and as a far and upstanding businessman. He was elected twice by the people of Natrona County to the office of coroner on the Democratic ticket in 1892 and in 1894. Campfield's barbershop was nestled between two businesses owned by W.S. Kimball. In 1894, Kimball was looking to expand the successful drugstore he owned next to Campfield's barbershop. As the owner of the property, Kimball evicted Campfield from the barbershop property to open the drugstore into this space. The day Campfield moved, there was a gunfight on Center Street between the mayor and another man. One bullet went through the other man's heart, and two more came through the front of the drugstore and hit the wall right behind where Matthew would have been cutting hair. Kimball claimed he had actually saved Campfield's life by evicting him.
And out of the ministry has grown a movement called Juneteenth. And it's an acronym for June the 19th, because the Proclamation of Independence was not released to the slaves in Texas, not made aware of it. In June, the third weekend in June, every year we celebrate, except for this year, due to coronavirus. We meet together and invite all of the community to come. We have free barbecue, we have a choir singing, we have individuals singing and playing and just enjoying one another to interact together. When you see Juneteenth being announced again and starting up again, I would like to invite any and all people to attend. Every church is welcome and every individual is welcome. But as for right now, remember and don't ever forget, judge people by the content of their heart, not by the educational background or their financial status.
My name is Leah Reed Varela. A Casper connection to the civil rights movement is my grandfather, Reverend James Reeb. He was a leader in the youth group at Casper's First Presbyterian Church, graduated from Natrona County High School, and attended Casper College. Upon graduating from Princeton Theological Seminary, he was ordained at Casper's First Presbyterian Church. As his personal faith evolved, he chose to become a Unitarian. Reverend James Reeb was honored in his hometown of Casper with the James Reeb Memorial Park, adjacent to the former Winter Memorial Presbyterian Church, now the Wyoming Food for Thought Project at 900 St. John Street. Reverend Reeb's love of the community can be seen reflected daily in the community playground and garden located at this site.
I'm Pastor Adrian White, and I pastor the Tree of Life Church of Casper, Wyoming. I was born in Flint, Michigan, and I enjoyed worshiping as a child at the Prayer Garden Church of God in Christ, which was founded by my grandfather, Dr. Purvis Gibbons. I was called into the ministry some 4 years ago while attending a off-site location, and within that location, God called me to founder where we are now, which is the Tree of Life Church. This site or this facility used to be the location of the Christ First Missionary Baptist Church, which was pastored by Reverend Ray Jackson. Reverend Jackson is a native of Rock Springs, Wyoming, and pastored this location under Christ First Missionary Baptist Church for over 20 years. During the time of Reverend Jackson's tenure as the pastor, the church became known for its gospel music and was quite a gospel extravaganza back then, and a part of the Black History Month. They performed at several different places, including, I know, the Juneteenth service here in Casper.
When this church was Christ First Missionary Baptist Church, my mother was very active in that church. And again, the message was claim your rights, use your rights, all of those things that go along with it. So it takes me back to the time that my mother was much younger than this church, but she was still carrying forth in what the missionary Baptist church. In fact, that word missionary does mean exactly that, go out, spread the word. And the word that was being spread was not just the biblical word, but talking about your walk in life, what people would call civilian life, which would be civil rights. For many years, people thought that the North Casper Clubhouse was a part of the North Casper community, but it was actually a separate type of entity because it was really a private club for whites. If you look at the architecture of that club and then go back and look at old movies of that era, you'll see much of that architecture in the clubhouse there. And then at later point, they said it was a National Youth Administration Depression era that built the building. And no doubt they did, but it was for private use. And so it's not unusual for politics to enter into private areas of operation and action.
We started the ministry out of my living room, and we've been able to build here in North Casper at 1124 North Elma, and we're debt-free. I came out of a pretty bad negative life after Vietnam and got my life turned around when I was 40 years old in 1984. And we started working on building our church because we were trying to help ex-addict and offenders. Being an ex-addict and offender myself, I thought I could relate to them more, and I believe that's where God wanted us to be. One of our mottos and way of doing things is trying to get everyone to come together all over the community, no matter what their race is, because we believe if we can get everybody to sit down and put a rib bone in their mouth and talk and fellowship together and everything being free so they don't have to pay for anything, and just get to know each other for who we really are. We don't care what your race, what your education, what your job is, whether you're a police officer or a pastor, whatever your race is, or whatever your job is, you've got Clint Eastwood folk in them, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we need to sit down together and start judging one another according to the content of their heart and not by their race or wealth or anything like that. And so we have different churches coming together to have choirs sing. We have individuals to come and play music. The Senator Scott was one of the primary writers of the program that got it passed through the legislature and things. And he generally came and had a speech. And we have a proclamation from the city every year and things like that, just trying to get the city and the people to come together and to realize that we're all one.
That was still back in the 90s. I remember it was pastor named Pastor Johnny Young was the head of that church. Like I said, I was back then. And I had went there for a little while. Then that is when I left and I started my own, God's own church.
Pastor Young and his wife had been very, very active in the community. Many people recall them bringing the music to the annual Martin Luther King celebration. They're not as active as they had been through the church because COVID apparently affected them very badly because the Black population in Mills is a small population. And of course, it was a combination of Blacks and whites meeting in the church and walking with Christ. But they were really adversely affected by the COVID situation that is still rampant in our country.
In honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and work,
I pledge to do everything that I can
to make America and the world a place where
equality and justice,
freedom and peace will grow and flourish.
I pledge to make nonviolence a way of life.
In my dealings with all people,
I will reject all forms of hatred,
bigotry,
and prejudice.
And I will embrace the values of unconditional,
Universal love.
truthfulness,
courage,
Compassion.
And dedication.
that empowered Dr. King.
I will dedicate my life
to creating the beloved community
Of Dr. King's dream.
Where all people can live together as sisters and brothers.
Although this country has struggled when it comes to equity for all and equality for all, I do see that there are strides that we have made. Liberty and justice for all can truly happen for everyone when everyone realizes that there isn't liberty and justice for all. I really believe if people would be able to step back and show empathy for one another and realize that everyone has a story and everyone's story is different, but everyone's story, no matter how different it may be, is important. We can really change the course of this great nation that we call America. Therefore, we would be able to see the error of our ways and hopefully, prayerfully, when we say for liberty and justice for all, that can really be true. I really think that we can come together and have liberty and justice for everyone. And I think that was Dr. King's dream. We live in a great nation, but we still have a long way to go. And if we could just step back, if we could listen to one another, we could really come together and be the great nation that we really, really want to be.
We hope you have enjoyed 2022 installment of the Casper Freedom Trail project and the MLK and Wyoming Equality Day of Service celebration. Maps of the historic sites along the Casper Freedom Trail mentioned in this presentation are available at the locations now listed on the screen. Because MLK Day is the only federal holiday designed as a national day of service, ServeWyoming encourages everyone to volunteer to improve our community. Here are some ways in which you can continue the work of MLK, turning his dream into action, and be of service to this most beloved community, making today truly a day on and not a day off.